On this Thursday night, preparing for a punishing storm. The dire warnings as Atlantic Canada braces for Hurricane Fiona.
They're saying that we might be right in the center of it.
Major prisoner swap, the happy homecoming for Ukrainian troops.
I want to thank everyone, especially Zelensky.
Plus, more Russians plot an exit strategy. Ontario Confidential, the critical information that province won't share with child welfare agencies and families. Global News investigates. And a family feud turns political.
That could create some challenges.
Two brothers estranged for 3 decades, vying for one mayoral seat.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Neetu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Hurricane Fiona is on track to blast through Atlantic Canada. Before the storm is expected to make landfall on Saturday morning, people in Nova Scotia will feel it coming. The Canadian Hurricane Centre says winds will start picking up overnight Friday before it hits the province. Officials are preparing for flooding, storm surges, and power outages. Ross Lord is in Cape Breton tonight, where people are preparing for the worst. Ross?
Well, Neetu, the waiting, wondering, and worrying is a regular part of life here in Atlantic Canada during hurricane season. But forecasters say there's nothing regular about Fiona, and they're warning people not to underestimate what's coming. Danny Wood is taking precautions, tying down his belongings, stocking up on gasoline in case Fiona causes prolonged power outages.
And they're saying that we might be right in the center of it, give or take a few miles, so we're just going to see what happens and take it from there.
Heeding the warnings from forecasters who say Fiona might make landfall in Atlantic Canada as a post-tropical storm, a term that's less ominous than hurricane, but the reality is its impact could be even more devastating because a separate weather system is likely to merge with Fiona, leading to widespread impact.
The two features are expected to interact, resulting in an extremely strong and dangerous storm for Eastern Canada, starting late Friday into Saturday.
The preparations are ramping up.
We don't haul our boats out until another week and a half or so, so we have no choice but to try to secure things.
Power utilities and emergency planners say they are ready to respond, but factors they can't control, like trees in full foliage, more vulnerable to being toppled over, are compounding everyone's anxiety. Neetu?
Ross Lord in Port Hawkesbury, Nova Scotia. Thanks, Ross. We'll be tracking Fiona as the storm makes its way up the Atlantic coast over the next few days and checking in with Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell for any updates. So, Anthony, what's the latest on the storm's movements?
Neetu, Fiona is already a large and dangerous storm, but it's going to get even bigger in size as it approaches Atlantic Canada. Here's Bermuda under a hurricane warning right now, and the eye is still very distinct. But what's going to happen over the course of the next day? This hurricane combines with a front, with a trough just off the east coast, and it's that hybrid nature that we haven't seen since Hurricane Sandy made landfall in the mid-Atlantic, causing all sorts of destruction. This is our version, the Canadian version of Sandy. Of course, there's less population in this area, but power outages, incredible waves, storm surge, and the freshwater flooding from rainfall. Let's just look at the waves, for example. By late Friday into Saturday morning, during high tide, just off the coast of Cape Breton, we could see 12 to 14 meter waves. That is going to cause incredible erosion and flooding as well. Now, the system, because of the angle it's taking, this doesn't happen very often, so trees are susceptible. They're still in full foliage. We're going to see power outages that likely last days, if not weeks. And of course, we have not just tropical storm and hurricane watches, rainfall warnings for up to 200 millimeters. There's a lot of weather going on, and this is just the beginning as landfall doesn't occur until early Saturday morning.
All right, Global News meteorologist Anthony Farnell. Thanks, Anthony. There is a growing exodus of Russian men fleeing the country following Vladimir Putin's order to mobilize 300,000 reservists to fight in Ukraine. According to the Finnish border guard, there's been a noticeable increase in traffic at the crossings between the two countries, with more than 4,800 Russians crossing yesterday, up from about 3,000 on a normal day. And this is the scene along one of Russia's southern borders, with a huge lineup to make the crossing into Georgia's breakaway region of South Ossetia. There is also new footage of the largest prisoner swap between Ukraine and Russia in the war so far. More than 200 Ukrainian prisoners were released. Russia got 55 soldiers back, including a close ally of President Putin. As those Russian soldiers prepare to return home, Redmond Shannon reports on thousands of other panicked men now fleeing before they're drafted into the war.
Walking out from the darkness after months as prisoners of war. More than 200 Ukrainian troops are now back on home soil. Many from the Azov battalion, soldiers who surrendered in May after weeks holed up in the Azovstal steel plant. As part of the brokered prisoner swap, their released commanders will have to stay in Turkey until the end of the war. We are proud of you, President Volodymyr Zelensky told them. 10 foreigners who fought for Ukraine were also freed with the help of Saudi negotiators.
Well, I just want to say I want to thank everyone, especially Zelensky and the Saudis and everyone else involved.
In exchange, Russia got back just 55 soldiers, along with the prize of Viktor Medvedchuk, a pro-Russian Ukrainian politician and oligarch who was facing charges of treason in Ukraine. Alongside the reunions, there are separations too. The Kremlin's mobilization of reservists already underway. Reports say anti-mobilization protesters have been drafted too, even those without military experience. Men trying to escape the draft face long waits or hefty airfares.
Mobilization is one of the reasons why I'm here.
The war's two alternate realities on display again at the UN General Assembly. Both sides accusing each other of lies and war crimes.
Russian diplomats are directly complicit because their lies incite these crimes and cover them up.
So despite this week's prisoner swap, hope of any war mediation seems further away than ever. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Coming up a little later, Eric Sorensen takes a deeper look at Russia's war strategy and how plans to stage referendums could lay the groundwork for control of key Ukrainian territory. First, though, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has agreed to scrap Canada's COVID-19 vaccine mandate at the border and make the ArriveCan app optional. A senior government source tells Global News the decision was made today, but plans still need to be finalized. The federal government is still considering whether to maintain masking requirements for planes and trains. The Prime Minister returned to work in Ottawa today. Trudeau sparred with Pierre Poilievre in the first question period since the Conservative leadership race. As David Akin reports, a few shots were fired as the two leaders pressed each other on inflation and the rising cost of living.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
It started out graciously enough. The Prime Minister, speaking French, wished Pierre Poilievre congratulations on his new job, but then it was down to business, a fight over carbon taxes.
The leader of the Liberal Party has an opportunity to respect the fact that heating your home in January and February in Canada is not a luxury. And it does not make those Canadians polluters. They're just trying to survive.
The Prime Minister pointed to his just-announced plan to double the GST rebate, top up a housing benefit, and help give kids in low-income homes money for dental care.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we're going to continue to stay focused on direct and real help for Canadians.
Trudeau got a dig in about Poilievre's comment during the leadership campaign that cryptocurrency was a good hedge against inflation.
If Canadians had followed the advice of the Leader of the Opposition and invested in volatile cryptocurrencies in an attempt to, quote, opt out of inflation, they would have lost half of their savings.
Well, Poilievre suggested Trudeau was an out-of-touch jet setter.
This from a Prime Minister who burned more jet fuel in 1 month than 20 average Canadians burn in an entire year.
Now, speaking of jets, Global News can report there will soon be some big news on the travel front. The Prime Minister has signed off on a plan to end the mandatory use of the ArriveCan app for cross-border travelers. Other health restrictions, including vaccine requirements, are likely to expire September 30th. The rules on mask wearing may remain in place. Expect a formal announcement on these changes Monday, Neetu.
David Akin reporting tonight. Thanks, David. The federal government is launching a long-awaited review to determine how legalizing marijuana has affected Canadians.
The review will help ensure that the Act adapts to the current situation and continues to meet Canadians' needs and expectations.
The Liberal government lifted the prohibition on recreational use and sale of cannabis nearly 4 years ago, with the provision it would review the law 3 years later. The Cannabis Act review is almost a year overdue. It will look at several areas, including the impact on Indigenous people, the health of Canadians, and the black market. Shocking secrecy in Ontario's child welfare system. Coming up, the critical information the province isn't sharing with the public. Plus, the incredible new image of our farthest planet, courtesy of the James Webb Telescope. For the past year, Global News has been investigating the state of the child welfare system in Ontario. Tonight, we have a shocking discovery to share with you. For years, the province has identified what it calls high-risk foster care and group homes, but it isn't sharing the information with the public or children's aid societies, the organizations responsible for placing kids in care. Our Carolyn Jarvis is part of the investigative team behind this project. Carolyn?
Neetu, we've learned that the Ontario government has a small but specialized team of investigators which identifies potentially problematic foster care and group homes and then conducts unannounced inspections. That part experts in the field are praising, but here's the rub. The ministry isn't sharing the names of those homes with children's aid societies nor Indigenous agencies who may have kids there.
If you're a young person going to live in a group home, let's say, shouldn't you know that there's concerns about the home and what those are before you go there? Shouldn't your parents or your caregivers or legal guardians know about what those concerns are?
Since the specialized team was formed in 2017, 15 foster care agencies and group home operators in Ontario have come under its watch. We were able to obtain their names through a Freedom of Information request and have posted them on our website at globalnews.ca, as well as responses from all of the companies. The government, meanwhile, wouldn't explain to us why it won't make the names public, and the documents we obtained don't explain why a specific operator was deemed high risk. We've reported on some of the group homes on that list in the past, homes where kids say they were neglected, physically restrained without justification, and where some kids have even died, which is why current and former children's aid directors say it is vital that if the province knows a home is potentially problematic, the public needs to know as well. Neetu?
Carolyn Jarvis in Toronto. Thanks, Carolyn. And as Carolyn mentioned, you can read the complete investigation, the latest in our child welfare series, on our website, globalnews.ca/globalnational. The Royal Canadian Mint has unveiled a new keepsake coin representing the truth of the residential school system. The artwork on the coins, created in partnership with the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, is an expression of Indigenous culture, with one side showing a combination of First Nations, Inuit and Métis designs, and the other bearing orange handprints and the words "Every Child Matters" in English and in French. With net proceeds going to an NCTR Community Healing Fund, the coins are also meant to educate Canadians and spark conversations about the impacts of the institutions of assimilation, while instilling a commitment to reconciliation across the country. Ahead, violent protests spiral in Iran over the death of a young woman. The Ukrainian military says it is gaining ground against Russian troops in key areas of Luhansk. It's still one of 4 Russian-controlled territories set to hold a referendum on joining Russia. Ukraine and its allies say the votes are rigged. As Eric Sorensen reports, they're part of Putin's wider strategy to gain crucial ground and justify his reasoning.
In Luhansk, in eastern Ukraine, Russian colors and flags are everywhere. This billboard promotes a united Russia. Much of the ethnic Russian population in this war-torn area supports a referendum to join Russia. We need Russia's protection, says this man, speaking Russian. My generation was brought up in the Soviet Union, she says. We need to unite again. But in Zaporizhia, strong Ukrainian defiance toward Russia. calling the referendum illegitimate. A so-called referendum, he says, is being forced from the outside against the will of the people. The referendum, he says, is fake to show occupied territories want to join Russia. Fake or not, many believe Russian-installed officials will declare all the results in favor of joining Russia.
The results of those referendum are predetermined. The majority of the people in there it'll be reported that they support joining Russia. That is far from the truth.
Russia is backing referendums in Luhansk and Donetsk and in Zaporizhia and Kherson. But it is also here where Russian forces are in control or trying to control eastern Ukraine. Now, Ukrainian forces took back Kharkiv, but it is in these 4 provinces where Russia appears to be trying to consolidate both a military grip and now a political grip that would seamlessly connect Russia to Crimea. And in Russia's view, it would turn this fight in the region from an attack on Ukraine to a defense of Russia. President Vladimir Putin has now threatened to use nuclear weapons to defend what he deems Russian territory and justify the mobilization of more Russian forces.
He has been losing. So now he is using this mobilization and also the referenda. Russia then can pretend that any attempt to liberate these Ukrainian territories would be a direct attack on Russia itself.
The U.S. says Russia's actions will not stop the fight inside those territories.
No Russian claim to annex territory can take away Ukraine's right to defend its own land.
In effect, Washington and NATO are calling Putin's bluff. But when Russia says it will defend itself with nuclear weapons, it is a high-stakes bluff for both sides. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Another high-profile ally of Vladimir Putin has died under suspicious circumstances. Russian state media says Anatoly Gerashenko died after falling down several flights of stairs. Gerashenko was the former head of a Russian aviation research university and an important figure in the Russian defense establishment. Since the invasion of Ukraine began, nearly a dozen high-ranking Russians with close ties to the Kremlin have died in what are said to be accidents or apparent suicides. At least a dozen people have now been killed during growing protests in Iran following the death of a young woman while in the custody of the country's morality police. The protests have spread to more than 80 towns and cities, with the anger focused on the country's fundamentalist regime and its police and security services. Last Friday, 22-year-old Mahsa Amini died after being arrested in Tehran, accused of not wearing a headscarf. As part of the crackdown, the Iranian government has shut down most of the country's mobile networks and blocked access to social media services and the internet. Next, no lost love. 2 estranged brothers in Ontario go head-to-head in a race for mayor. The James Webb Space Telescope keeps delivering. Its newest image, released by NASA, shows our solar system's farthest planet in a whole new light. The infrared image of Neptune captures the clearest view of the planet's rings in more than 30 years. The crisp picture also shows thin lines of light around the icy giant. NASA says they're methane ice clouds reflecting the sun. 7 of Neptune's 14 known moons are also clearly visible. The biggest is Triton, which appears brighter than Neptune itself. The planet's rings have not been detected since NASA's Voyager 2 became the first spacecraft to observe Neptune during a flyby in 1989. NASA says today's tests were successful, paving the way to a green light for the launch of its Artemis 1 rocket. 2 earlier launches for the moon mission were scrubbed over concerns about a fuel leak. The next scheduled launch window is September 27th. The unmanned Artemis 1 mission will be a test of the rocket and capsule designed to return people to the moon in 2025. It is a sibling rivalry unlike anything seen before in Port Colborne, Ontario. The Lake Erie town south of Niagara Falls has become a focal point during this municipal election cycle. And a pair of brothers is to thank for the attention because both of them are running for the same mayoral seat. And as Mike Drolet reports, their family tie is where their similarities end.
You could argue Port Colborne wouldn't exist on the north shore of Lake Erie if not for the Welland Canal, which connects Lake Ontario to the rest of the Great Lakes. The town, now a city, was incorporated in the 1830s, but its roots are made of steel.
Yeah, a lot of rich history here.
A lot of rich history.
This is Bill Steele, one of the descendants of William Steele, a farmer and loyalist to the King of England, forced to flee north during the American Revolution in the 1770s. Today, Bill, like his great-uncle and great-grandfather before him, serves as the mayor, and he would have been acclaimed for another term if not for Charles Steele.
I decided to run for mayor when I realized that nobody else wanted to run.
What makes this race such a curiosity is this oddity. The two men fighting for the big seat are brothers.
As long as they can sit down and have supper together after.
They haven't spoken in 30 years.
Well, then that could create some challenges, I'm sure.
That's right, no communication for 3 decades. Running an underdog campaign, Charles didn't even let his brother know he was ready to challenge him. So far, they're keeping things clean, focusing on issues like affordable housing and water, and not their estrangement.
Is there any reason why? Just have different viewpoints on politics and life and things like that.
You can't exactly fault Bill for failing to see his brother coming. Charles is going by his given name on the ballot, even though everyone who knows him here has always called him by his middle name, David.
If you were in a debate, would you refer to him as David? That's his name. That's a bit of a jab, but I'm not really bothered by it.
And that's good, because while politics can get nasty, nothing compares to sibling rivalry. Mike Trelay, Global News, Port Colborne, Ontario.
And that is Global National for this Thursday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada, celebrating the heroes of the 1972 Summit Series. Today, members of Parliament welcomed several players from Team Canada who defeated the Soviets in the legendary final game 50 years ago today, one of the most iconic moments in Canadian hockey history. Thanks for watching. Jeff Semple will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Have a great night.